So we will be speaking about home today. Just plant that in the back of your mind. I've entitled today's sermon, Ethics, Values, and Silicon Valley. And I am going to be employing the tried and true preaching method of 20th century theologian Karl Barth of holding the Bible in one hand and the newspaper in the other. Now, we will get to the Bible in due course, do not worry. But until then, I'm actually going to use a book in place of a newspaper today, that book that was just read from, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism. This is a term that was coined by its author, Shoshana Zuboff. The book was published in 2019. And in that book, she claims that we have lost our sense of home. Let me start with a story. Zuboff tells a story from 1981 when she was beginning her career. She's a Harvard professor in the business school as a psychologist. She was meeting with people at a paper mill, and one of the managers said to her, looking at the changes technologically that were coming along, he said to her, "In the future, will we be working with smart machines, or will there be smart people there too?" She said that question echoed for her the timeless questions of politics, questions of master or slave, lord or subject, home or exile. And that encounter set the trajectory for the next 40 years of her career, where she would ask in many different ways, can the digital future be our home? Back in 81, can the digital future be our home, was a question of companies. It was a question of the workplace. Today, it's a question that touches our entire lives. Can the emerging information technology civilization be our home? Her answer, in short, is that our sense of home has been stolen, that our very future and its flourishing depends on us regaining control of our homes, reclaiming our power to know and determine the boundaries of what is sacred to home. She says, and I quote, "There's a universally shared ache to return to the place we left behind, or to found a new place in which our hopes for the future can nest and grow." So I want us to think about home and how it is that every last creature has this call to home. Think of the creatures you know and have encountered. For me, I go back 30 years to my encounter with the olive ridley sea turtle on the west coast of Costa Rica. The olive ridley sea turtles return to Ostianal Beach to lay their eggs. It's the same beach where some years previous they had been hatched from, but had never returned to. The monarch butterfly. When I lived in southeastern Ontario, the monarch butterflies would stop in our backyard. They travel some 4,000 kilometers between north and south, often with butterflies not even having flown it before. It's in their DNA, the where to go, to rest and to breed. Think about the creatures, the loons that come back to the same lake every year, Canada geese. Think about how so many of us have that longing to go at least once in our lifetimes to our ancestral home, or how many of us go way out of our way to pilgrimage to a homestead every summer. The call of home, it's innate within us. Nearly every creature, says Zuboff, shares some version of this deep attachment to a place in which life has been known to flourish, the kind of place we call home. And it's in the nature of human attachment that every journey and expulsion sets into motion the search for home. Finding home is amongst the most profound needs, and it's evident by the price we are willing to pay for it. So we can think biblically of Adam and Eve expelled from the garden. We can think of Moses and the Israelites, 40 years in search of the promised land. We need look no further than the 10 million people internally and externally displaced in Ukraine today to understand that home is sacred to us and necessary as a place where we learn to be human, where we find our grounding and our original place of belonging. All right, I haven't talked really about technology at all yet, have I? Let me explain what Zuboff and others are getting at when they talk about this loss of home. Many of you, some of you, will be familiar with Google's suite of products called Nest. The technology changes so frequently that I'm probably even speaking old news already. There is a Nest thermostat that came out just a few years ago. And you remember how I told you about the dog last week, Ibo? And how Ibo shows up in your house and uses machine learning to kind of figure you out. So you go to a house over here with Ibo, the digital doggy, and house over here, and it behaves differently. Same sort of thing in this thermostat. It gets to know your preferences and can almost read your mind, and it can connect to devices in your oven or your exercise device in your car. Soon after came a Nest product, the home surveillance Nest. And here's an interesting story. You know how people do like to bring down corporations and expose their, the shiftiness that can be behind them. So someone took it upon themselves to look into this Nest home surveillance system and saw that it has a microphone. But if you open up the digital, user's manual, there's no microphone. Nowhere does it tell you that there's a microphone. And so people asked Google, hey, what's up with the microphone? We didn't know that was there. We didn't intend to use it. Oh, wait, you can opt out of the microphone. Yeah, you can just opt out of that feature. However, we'll stop supporting updates on your device, so it really won't do anything but sit there and be a bit of plastic in your house. What these products do, in addition to the lovely things they do to give us a sense of safety in our homes, is they gather data about us. And for example, the home security Nest system, if you wanted to look at the privacy policies of all the other companies and places that they will sell your data potentially, you would have to read no less than 1,000 privacy policies. I know, it's shocking, isn't it? And then when the information is shared with these other companies or, governments, places in the world, the original company, Google, yeah, I'm picking on Google. We use it for our email here at the church. It's not like I'm part of the problem. They take no responsibility for what happens when it's used elsewhere. Okay, I'm not trying to shock you, I'm just giving you the facts. So Google really developed this idea of surveillance capitalism. It was Shoshana Zuboff who gave it this classy little name, but they developed the technology. Facebook uses it. Many companies use it, whether they're in tech or not, because it's extremely lucrative. And I think this is where I'm going to explain to you just what it is. Well, you know what? Let's just start. Before I tell you exactly how they scrape all that data, let's talk about capitalism. This is a really helpful way to understand what this sort of surveillance capitalism is. We know about market capitalism, industrial capitalism. What Zuboff says is, in that model with the Industrial Revolution, we took things that were part of nature, the natural world, and brought them into the marketplace and sort of monetized them, made them commodities. So, for example, famously, nature was brought into the marketplace and became something called land, which could be bought and sold. Work went into the marketplace and became something called labor, which could be bought and sold. Surveillance capitalism follows the same pattern, but, and I quote, with a dark and unexpected twist, because what it claims from the natural world is private human experience, to be brought into the marketplace, to be brought together with machine learning or artificial intelligence, and translated into something called behavioral data. So our private human experience is turned into behavioral data that is bought and sold to corporations. What they can do when they find out about us is they can predict what we are likely to do right now, in a little while, and down the road. And that's what Google learned in the early 2000s. And what they started to measure was click-through rates, right? So how if we're looking at something on an email, on a web page, how many times will we click onto the next link or the next ad? And they learned that this was very lucrative to be able to, I'm going to take my earring out, folks, so it stops clinking. Very lucrative to be able to buy and sell this data. I'm going to give you a couple of Zuboff's definitions of surveillance capitalism. I'm going to throw them on the screen for you so that you too. She has 8 definitions. I'm not going to overwhelm you here. The first one, surveillance capitalism is a new economic order that claims human experience as free raw material for hidden commercial practices of extraction, prediction, and sales. That's kind of what I've just been explaining to us all. Another definition, as significant a threat, surveillance capitalism is as significant a threat to human nature in the 21st century as industrial capitalism was to the natural world in the 19th and 20th century. Now that could sound alarmist, and it could, this is one person's point of view who has spent 40 years on just this question, and Harvard hasn't fired her yet, so I don't know. I think she might have some science behind her claim. But we can certainly, if the reference is what industrial capitalism has done to the natural world, yeah, that's huge. It makes it feel a little bit overwhelming and scary to consider this. Here's what this residual data is that the algorithms take from you. Say, for example, you post a photo of a birthday party on Facebook, or like me, you post a photo of eating outside, going to the jazz club. They don't actually really care about what you're doing, but they're able to take from that who else you've tagged in your picture, or just your face, right? And use it in facial recognition technology, or like the microphone in the home security product. Voices are as important as faces. And all of that data is compiled. It's kind of stripped of what makes it personal to you and is used so that things can be sold to us. That's basically about it. So here's the problem. And here, let's put up another quote. This is, if I put them in the right order for my daughter, which I might not have, it's hard for us, this one here, hard for us to have a concept of this. This is, again, Shoshana Zuboff. It's hard to have a concept not because we're stupid, but because these procedures have been disguised. They operate in stealth, engineered to be undetectable, to create ignorance in us all. They call us users. Our ignorance is their bliss. Our ignorance is their bliss. And here's the weird thing. So whenever people are surveyed and they're asked, hey, what do you think about this, that these companies take your data and use it and sell it to make money, or what do you think about the fact that you keep getting Fluvog shoe ads on your feed constantly? And everyone says, like 80-some% of people say, I do not like it. Doesn't feel right. Something shifty about it. But their whole technique is, like with the Google Nest, to kind of claim innocence, to only make adjustments when they have to, but really what the main goal is to habituate us. So, so you can take legal action against Facebook for doing something that felt kind of unethical with your private data, but they'll just take you to court for years on end until, 4 years down the road, people are like, well, what were we so upset about again? So you get habituated to it. All right, I'm going to switch to another author and read for you a quote. I've promoted this book before. I think I've ordered it for the church library. Quite sure I have. So Johann Hari, in his book, Stolen Focus, Why You Can't Pay Attention and How to Think Deeply Again, he explains it really simply. A friend of his in the tech industry gave him this explanation of what the companies do with our data. His friend described it as inside of Facebook's servers, inside of Google's servers, there's a little voodoo doll. It's a model of you. And it starts by looking not much like you. In fact, it's sort of a generic model of a human, but then they're collecting your click trails, everything you click on, and your toenail clippings and your hair droppings. That is everything you search for, every little detail of your life online. And they're reassembling all the metadata you didn't really think was meaningful so that the doll looks more and more like you. And then when you show up on, for example, YouTube, they're waking up that doll. And they're testing out hundreds of thousands of videos against this doll, seeing what makes its arm twitch and move so that they know it's effective. And then they serve that to you, the thing that makes your arm twitch. It seems like a ghoulish image. And then Johann, hearing this, paused. And his friend went on to say, by the way, they have a doll like that for 1 in 4 humans on Earth. It's kind of spooky. Zoboff says that we're actually working to preserve our democratic future when we push against this. She reminds us, too, you know how people will say sometimes that if you're not paying for it, you're the product? Right? So if you get your Gmail for free, you're the product. She says it's actually kind of more sinister than that because most companies care about the product they bring to market, right? They want whatever the goals are, they want that product matters to them. She says we're more like the raw material. She goes back to like the Industrial Revolution and says it's more like we are the trees that are left behind when they clear cut the old growth forest. She uses the example of elephants on the African continent, where they leave behind the carcass to take the ivory, that we're like the carcasses left behind, that we're just the data. Okay, so I could stand here all day, and I could denounce surveillance capitalism. I could lay out for you the ways in which its underlying values of the companies, such as Google and Facebook, are determined, are detrimental for the flourishing of life. I could, as I have, made a case for why we must be wary of this stealthy business practice. But I suppose the question might still remain, why is it my business to do this from this pulpit? And I could perhaps be accused of being a little too socialist, maybe even Marxist. I could be confronted with those saying, you know what, we want government out of business, but we certainly want churches out of business. Stay in your lane. So let me be as abundantly clear as I can. I speak of these evils not because I'm a socialist, not to raise alarm, But I seek to incite in each and every one of us a vigilance in calling out and resisting the stealthy evils of surveillance capitalism because I'm a Christian. We should care because our faith demands no less of us. What surveillance capitalism does is perpetuate sin. You've heard me talk before about sin being separation. Let's call up a definition of original sin. This is by Marjorie Suchocki, a well-renowned process theologian. Original sin can be interpreted as inherited structures of consciousness acting as socially sanctioned norms that assume the ill-being of Earth or any of its inhabitants. These norms predispose us toward their perpetuation and inevitably involve us in sin. So sin is inherited structures that have at their heart the ill-being of creation. Original sin doesn't really come from Adam, but an acknowledgement that we're born into sin. What we're born into are sinful social structures, such as those that perpetuate racism or oppression or violence. And so surveillance capitalism is sin in that its intents and its actions work for the ill-being of human life. They work for the sole purpose of profit. And so I lift up the story of Jesus tempted in the wilderness, not because I think that the devil's going to show up with horns and whatever it is, he carries the fork, and tell you to turn stone into bread, or say, hey, take that crazy risk because if you believe in that God figure, you'll be lifted up and saved from all harm. I lift up the story of Jesus in the wilderness because I think it tells us about the clarifying work that needs to happen as part of our faith. That the devil, that sin will show up in guises that are invisible to us, that in fact, technology has the ability to hide in ways like never before, evil intent from us. And many of us will say, oh, well, I have nothing to hide, or this is the price I need to pay. But it's not really. We can actually have at our disposal all sorts of amazing technology without having to hand over the sanctuary of our own home. 2 more points. I want to say that hope for change is not unprecedented. This surveillance capitalism thing, it's been 20 years. That is nothing in the history of the world. Look at the countless times that people have said, you know what, we went along with this for a while, and this is not working anymore for us. We are going to stand up. Back to 1989 and the Berlin Wall. Just go all through history and say, we have power. Governments and corporations are expressions of us, but people in mass have so much power to resist evil and bring about change for the flourishing of life. And so I know I've shared a fair bit of dire news. I want to end with a story that's a little bit hopeful, that just throws some light onto the ability of each one of us to be human with each other. And this story is told in Zuboff's book. It's in rural Illinois. The year is 2016. And there's an elderly couple. They owe $350 on their 1998 Buick. Still paying off the Buick in 2016. They missed a $95 payment with the credit union. And so a local, what do they call it, a repo guy is sent out to their little house in the country to get the car back. And of course, he's met with a couple who had to decide that month to buy medication instead of make the car payment. And he thinks to himself, this isn't right. So he offers to waive his fee, and then they're grateful. And then he goes back to the credit union manager and says, I want to pay their debt. I mean, this is silly. And he's urged, well, just follow the processes, do the right thing, and just follow the processes. Well, eventually what comes to pass is that one of those public appeals are made for money to help the couple. And of course, within 24 hours, there's enough money to buy the car outright, to get it detailed, to buy them a Thanksgiving turkey, and to hand them $1,000 cash. When this man, Jim Ford, celebrates his 10 minutes of fame, 10 seconds, he says, you know what? No one should be making much of a deal about what I've done. It's just called being nice. Like, we ought to just be human to each other. And so it makes me think, you know what? Church has a really long history of creating sanctuary. We call this a sanctuary. Church has been a place throughout history since the time of Constantine when people could take refuge from political persecution in churches and the authorities would not arrest you. If we're going to be church, we are to be a place of home, a place that supports systems and structures and ways of life and shines light on stories where people are valued, where their contributions are valued, where their privacy is honored, where their homes are sacred. Thanks for listening to my soapbox speech today. May the Spirit guide you in your listening. Amen.